This is an introduction to UKRIO's research misconduct flowchart. Any matter begins when it is notified to the official named person within the institution. There may be correspondence and discussion via informal contact with the confidential liaison point within the institution. Once a matter is formally notified to the named person, they will then instigate the institutional research misconduct procedure. The named person will acknowledge receipt and make sure that relevant parties are notified. This might include student services, or human resources, or colleagues within the finance department if the matter relates to something that has attracted research funding. In order for a matter to go forward, the named person must ensure the fulfillment of two criteria. Firstly, they will need to consider the timing and whether the research was conducted under the auspices of the institution. For example, they need to determine whether the respondent was an employee or a research student at the time the alleged behavior took place. This is because not all institutions will include research students under their research misconduct procedure. It is entirely at their discretion to determine who is covered and who is not. The named person will also need to determine if the respondent was conducting the research as a visiting researcher on an honorary contract. Secondly, the named person needs to consider whether the matter relates to potential research misconduct or whether it relates to some other form of behavior such as alleged fraud, theft, or misconduct that are not necessarily related to research. It is at this stage that the named person must establish whether there is an immediate risk of harm to people, animals, or the environment. If that is the case, then they must take action prior to any matter moving forward. Once the named person has undertaken the review and deemed that the matter fulfills both criteria and has sufficient substance, they will then move on to the next stage, which will be an initial investigation. The initial investigation stage will be carried out either by the institution or by a committee convened to review the matter. They will gather and review relevant information from the initiator of the complaint with due diligence, hold any relevant meetings, and then provide a report to the named person. There are 4 outcomes which may occur at this point. First, is that the matter is dismissed because it doesn't fall under the research misconduct procedure, neither does it need to be referred elsewhere. Second, the matter is either mistaken, frivolous, or lacks substance to be taken forward. There is no case to answer, as it may be deemed that the matter is poor practice which can be dealt with informally and locally. This would mean that it falls below the expected standards of good practice and are potentially questionable research practices that are not considered research misconduct. To meet the conditions of research misconduct, there needs to be evidence that the behavior was reckless or deliberate, and it may be that in this instance, the panel deemed that to not be the case. Third, the matter is not deemed to be research misconduct, but it is serious and needs to be dealt with elsewhere. For example, the matter could potentially fall under another institutional procedure such as bullying, harassment, or grievance. Fourth, the matter might be referred to another relevant body, be it internally or externally to the institution. These outcomes will bring the investigation to an end. Note that these 4 outcomes are also possible at the receipt of allegation stage. Both the initiator of the complaint and the respondent can appeal against these 4 outcomes. We'll discuss the appeal stage in more detail later. If the matter is deemed to be sufficiently serious, potentially with evidence of deliberate or reckless research misconduct, there is prima facie case to take it forward to the next stage, which will involve a full investigation. A full investigation panel will be convened that will normally consist of at least 3 people, one of whom should be external to the institution. 2 of the members, whether external or internal, should be disciplinary experts with a very good understanding of the matter being raised in terms of its academic discipline. The 3rd member does not need to be a disciplinary expert, but is there to make sure the investigation is carried out properly in accordance with the research misconduct procedure. The panel will interview both the complainant and the respondent and any relevant witnesses. They will gather any additional evidence that wasn't collected at the initial stage. It is important to stress that the investigation is not disciplinary, neither is it a court of law. The purpose of the investigation is to thoroughly gather all the evidence and determine what has actually happened in this particular situation. Once the investigation is completed, the panel will share the report with the named person. There are 5 different outcomes that are very similar to the blue boxes that we discussed earlier following the initial investigation stage. First, an outcome could be that the matter needs to be referred to another formal process or external body. This will then end the process. Second, it may be deemed that the allegations do not have any substance or that they are mistaken. Third, it may be deemed that allegations were vexatious, which is more serious than mistaken, as it indicates that they weren't made in good faith and that the individual raising them was trying to cause trouble or is just doing this on a serial basis. Fourth, similar to the outcomes from the initial stage, the matter may be determined to have some substance, but it is of a minor nature and can be dealt with informally. For example, it could be poor practice rather than deliberate or reckless behavior and therefore do not fall under research misconduct. The fifth and final outcome is that the allegations are upheld either in full or in part. The named person will then share the substance of the report to the initiator and respondent in order to give them the opportunity to challenge any points of factual accuracy in the report. It is important that this step is built into the process to ensure the procedure has been followed properly. The named person will carry out any outcomes that follow from the report. These will relate to whether the record of research needs to be corrected, in which case there will be a need to contact journals and publishers. If there are any retractions that are needed, then data that are in any repository would need to be removed. The named person will also need to ensure that duty of care to the complainant or the respondent is followed up so that any reputational damage is minimized. This can be very difficult to do, but it needs to be considered because sometimes people may not want anything publicized. Finally, where research misconduct has been found and it is deliberate, then the institution will need to refer the matter under their disciplinary procedures as appropriate for staff or students. Both the complainant and respondent should be given the opportunity to appeal. Typically, there will be several grounds for appeal, but only one of these would need to be met for an appeal to move forward. An individual would normally be given a set amount of time in which to decide whether they wish to appeal or not. This should normally be carried out by somebody other than the named person or the team that led the initial investigation. This alternative named person will review the information provided to decide whether the appeal meets one of the criteria and has enough substance for it to go forward. Institutions will have their own criteria for appeals, but an example could include matters such as alleged bias, that the investigation wasn't carried out according to the procedure in such a way that it had an impact on the outcome. Another example might be that the outcome recommended is disproportionate to the findings. If the alternative named person considers that there is a case for an appeal to be heard, then they will establish a panel to review the matter again. They will generally review the process that has already been carried out and assess the evidence rather than reinvestigate the whole matter. The appeal panel is there to provide an independent set of eyes to review the matter rather than for another completely new hearing of the matter. The panel will report to the alternative named person, who will then carry out the findings of the appeal. This could be that the whole matter is set aside and is deemed unsafe, or it could be that the outcome is upheld either in full or in part, in which case all the protagonists are informed of any further outcomes to be carried out. As mentioned earlier, the appeals stage shown in green boxes on the flowchart can happen after the initial investigation stage shown in pink, as well as after the full investigation stage shown in yellow. Once all of this has happened, then the process is closed. If there are no further appeals or the appeals are not deemed to be of substance, then there will not be an appeal when the process was closed following the report and the outcomes carried out. This concludes the flowchart walkthrough. A downloadable PDF version of the flowchart is available from the resources section of the UKRIO website.